There was an article in the Washington Post yesterday or the day before discussing that the effects of mass incarceration is having a macro level psychological effect on the population, where it creates a completely inaccurate perception of African Americans being dangerous, which fuels and perpetuates the cycle of mass incarceration. And so when we're talking about the history of police institutions, we really need to be careful to not perpetuate the myth. And the myth is that we have this local police force that's designed to protect the interests of the community, and that it's a friendly neighbor police force. And this myth is taken very seriously by police agencies, particularly the Phoenix Police Department. You hold any event about community policing in response to Ferguson, the Black Lives Matter protest, you're going to see the Phoenix Police Department sending people down there to talk about how much they care about the communities, but they're unwilling to discuss what they're doing to avoid over-criminalizing those communities. And they pass the buck to the legislature saying that we're just carrying out the law, but it's not accurate at all. It's entirely disingenuous. But they understand that largely the effect of police institutions depends on the legitimacy we give them as the people. And so that's why it's important to acknowledge the history of police institutions as it relates to the history of the development of the state and the purpose of preservation of power. And we're talking about preserving power, whose power? And then when we look at the context of the modern police state and mass incarceration, there's a discussion about civilian police review boards and having more civilian involvement of oversight of the police. And this is something that largely police forces oppose radically. Very seriously, because they don't want to have any kind of oversight about what's going on, because they've adopted a system of basically military chain of command, where they consider themselves to be a paramilitary organization organized along military lines, and they don't want to be subject to any kind of oversight or accountability by the public. And that's something that we need to change and discuss, because within the context of reform, we can discuss talking about, one, do we really need as many police as we do? And I think that's the first thing we discuss, because when we have a problem within our communities, do we need to actually call the police? Because when you call the police, what's going to happen? Someone's going to get arrested, someone's going to get charged with a crime, and often, particularly if you're a poor person of color, you're going to prison. So, and people, we start with a mass miseducation campaign in our elementary schools, giving children this false sense of security and belief in the police as somebody that's there to protect them. And then whenever they find themselves in an unfortunate situation involving domestic violence or some kind of other tragedy or property crime, and they call the police, and then all of a sudden they find themselves targeted as suspects, and they can't believe it. Well, why is that? Because we're failing our children and continuing this false perception campaign with the police that they're there to help people, when in fact they're not, and they're there to preserve the power of property interests.
Police, the Supreme Court has held several times in several different cases that police actually have no duty to protect anybody. That the Supreme Court has ruled that. Gonzalez, Castle Rock, I believe, is one of the bigger ones. They have no duty to protect anybody, but that's what you're taught in school. And of course, that makes sense. It's for the state's legitimacy and how we view the police. Again, the perceptions of the police. Their duty is to enforce the law, is not to protect people. Yes.
Is there any information on targeting of women or children specifically? Because I know there are some cases of judges that have targeted young, especially young black and brown boys, to send them to prison for money. But is that also happening among women? Do you know?
As a Pennsylvania case, the judge went to prison because he was funneling mostly children of color into private detention centers. So, maybe Diane can speak to that.
We know that there's a target of women who have defended themselves against abusers are more likely to go to prison. We know that. But any other targeting, I don't know of. But that one I do know is a fact.
You got something?
You never use the term peace officer, but technically, when we're speaking of the police, right, they're certified as peace officers. Do you think that's a misnomer, or do you think that that's a reachable ideal?
And so when we talk about the police certification, we're talking about the AZ post system, and the term peace officers. Again, it's part of the concerted propaganda campaign by police agencies to promote this concept of your friendly public police officer who's there to protect the public. So I would say that's a piece of propaganda.
You actually touched on AZ Post, and I just wanted to touch on that. The executive director of AZ Post was a gentleman named Lyle Mann. Lyle Mann was recently fired because he was pushing for mandatory reporting anytime an officer was arrested for a misdemeanor or a felony. There's currently, the way the law is written in the state of Arizona, there is no requirement for police agencies to report officers' arrests to AZ Post. So because he was pushing for that, the Yavapai County Sheriff and the Cochise County Sheriff teamed up to get him fired after 16 years.
They also have an off-duty hours racket kind of going on. They even killed one of their own over at one time. Finally, they got the coroner to say it was a suicide. They're a gang as much as a paramilitary unit, and they kill each other to keep each other in line.
They're discussing some theories behind the death of Sergeant Drent, was it?
Sean Drent,
Yes.
that was my case.
That's correct.
Up here.
Well, I'm the one that got them to change it from, what did they have it open, to finally making it suicide.
Yeah, I worked for Colleen.
Yeah, but I yelled into the camera that day and they changed it the next day. I told them, I said, how can you leave this open for a year?
I mean, the other side though, it's not listed as a suicide, it's still listed as open under the forensics as to the cause of death. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, but they announced it. They made the coroner announce it and say it was closed.
You mentioned the civilian police review boards. What's the history of those? When were they set up? Do they have any real power? Does Phoenix have one?
Can you touch on that, Diane, a little bit? So there's been a discussion with the Phoenix Police Force to create one, and there's been one without teeth that's been developed.
Without teeth, and they rejected it. Every time you want to put civilians on to actually have any power and have more votes than the officers, they rejected it.
And the
This is in
propaganda.
Phoenix.
Yeah, in Phoenix.
And the propaganda stance of the Phoenix Police Department is that in their experience, people who are sitting on civilian police review boards are more pro-police than the actual police themselves, and they want to make sure that there's an actual oversight. And so they have a
Stacking
very,
with their wives.
Well, who puts them on there?
Yeah.
so I can get more information to you later about the history of civilian review boards, but it's an ongoing national movement to develop these civilian review boards that can actually result in disciplinary measures over police agencies.
Do you know any place in the country where there has a civilian review board does have disciplinary power?
There are some, but I don't know offhand where they are.
Yeah.
Last week at that thing in Tucson, they mentioned that Rio Tinto, the mining company, hired the entire city of Superior Police and Fire Department to be there. How can they do this? This can't be legal, can it?
My understanding, as far as that the officers have the ability to work off duty, and so what we need to be discussing is the level of bias and prejudice that develops if you have so many police officers working off duty capacities or mining interests or other interests within the community. But it's
The
not
historical
new.
irony is ridiculous.
It's
Yeah.
the development of private policing co-aligns and corresponds with the development of the modern professional police force.
Can you three speak about discretion? That law enforcement has, or the police or police officers have discretion when they want to necessarily deem that they charge and arrest someone. Can you talk a little bit about that, Stan?
To me, that word seems ironic. Their duty is to enforce the law.
But is it really? Is it, and under the courts, is there duty to enforce the law? Or is there duty to enforce the law under discretion? What discretion, can you talk about that?
Right, and I think allowing the discretion allows for things such as racial discrimination, targeting neighborhoods, because especially when you have the police force of the racial makeup that most police forces are, whenever you grant that discretion, it takes it out of the hands of the legislature and puts it into the hands of the police, the individual police officer. To me, I think that's a lot of power.
At the same time, though, I mean, the constitutional authority of the executive branch to use discretion in enforcing the laws passed by the legislature can have positive effects as well, as we see with the immigration reform imposed by the Obama administration. And when we're looking at development of police institutions and critiquing this discretion, it's really about how it's employed, not whether or not it should exist. In the sense that the laws that result in the overcriminalization of our communities come from legislators. So to say that we shouldn't have discretion entirely would then promote a further escalation of the police state itself.
The positive side of discretion is having people that live in their communities policing their community, because that
Which is rare.
discretion means you can then say, you know, Timmy or Johnny or Jamal, I know you. And so therefore I take you back as policing used to be. Is there anything at all where we can create policy change, laws, whatever, that require people to live in their community? I live in a very small city of Maricopa, and the police chief there is now starting to push to requirements that people live in that city in order to police that city. Is there anything about that?
It's a common trend, this is, again, goes to this idea of the police regulating themselves.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that they try to do is argue that this concept of having people from our communities, policing our communities, results in better policing because we're self-policing, and it perpetuates this idea that the public is responsible for policing. What it often results is that you just basically have outsiders moving in and then resulting in policing the community. You had a question over here?
Just, so are y'all in law school?
He's a lawyer, lawyers, law students.
Okay, I'm like super thrilled to hear lawyers talking like this. I guess it's just my naivete about not knowing much about law school and lawyers, but I just was kind of wondering how you're considered within your law school or in the law community. Like, is this a fringe sort of perspective, or is it?
Come to one of our
growing,
meetings
or-
during the lunch hour, and usually you'll see, it's kind of, you know, you have the Business Law Students Association has gone 30 times the cover, but we're still here.
If you come out to our table, we have some handbooks that we give law students and people considering going to law school. They're called disorientation handbooks. And the reason why we call them disorientation handbooks is because we acknowledge that law school is primarily designed to brainwash people into accepting the history of white supremacy laws as being some kind of noble and good pursuit of pursuing. And so we have, when you go to law school, you're brainwashed to learn what the law is, not why the law is. And you're brainwashed to believe that there's some kind of integrity and injustice involved in the law without really analyzing the injustice and oppression that was the basis for forming the law and the purpose for forming the law in the first place. And so that's why the National Lawyers Guild is in my opinion, one of the most important national, international social justice legal organizations in the world, because we acknowledge that and we put it up front. And so while we often align with the ACLU on issues of constitutional rights, the ACLU is a nonpartisan organization that believes in constitutional rights for everyone. So while they would defend the right of a neo-Nazi to protest in the community of a people of color, we would tell the neo-Nazi to fuck off, because that's not within the interest of promoting human rights over property rights. And so I think that's a major distinction. And so we're kind of like a herd of cats in the sense that we're a bunch of leftists. I identify as an anarchist. You might have a social democrat, a green person, and a communist person. So
Oh, feminist.
I think we all are feminists. So,
And remember, you don't have to be a lawyer or a law student to be a member. You have to, legal workers, jailhouse lawyers, all those kinds of people also who work in the field and who have the same beliefs can be members as well.
And one of the great things about participating in the National Lawyers Guild throughout law school is it puts you in contact with a national organization of students and legal workers and jailhouse lawyers, and it helps you feel as if you're not insane for wanting to enter a system that is based on so many systems of oppression with the intention of utilizing those to promote the interests of social movements and coordinating those efforts. And through my experience in the system working with ASU NLG, we did events on a wide variety of topics, blew a lot of people's minds, and started a lot of arguments, which I think we won every one of them.
Good.
And I think we're out of time, and I don't want to hold anyone captive for being polite. But we'll be talking